Support comes from St. Louis Public Library Foundation, helping the library serve children and their families with programs and services needed to become lifelong readers. More information about the foundation is at slpl.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Late last month, Carol Mayorga, a 46-year-old mom of 3, drove about 3.5 hours from her home in rural Kennett in Missouri's Bootheel region to do a routine check-in at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services office in St. Louis. Mayorga had taken time off her job at John's Waffle and Pancake House to make the trip to renew her employment authorization document. But when she met with immigration officials, what had previously been a smooth and familiar process became a nightmare. Mayorga was detained and shackled before being moved to a number of rural Missouri jails. She's now being held at the Greene County jail in Springfield and faces deportation to Hong Kong. Carol's story, and that of her Kennett, Missouri neighbors who've been rallying to try to bring her home, is the subject of a Midwest Newsroom and STLPR report published over the weekend. And here to talk about that report, we have its 2 co-authors, Kavahn Mansouri, investigative reporter with the Midwest Newsroom. Kavahn, thanks for coming back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And STLPR reporter Chad Davis. Thank you for being here again, too.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Kavahn, I did kind of go over what happened. What is it that I missed in what happened? For example, when exactly did this occur?
Yeah, this happened in late April. And basically, like as you said, Carol drove up from Kennett, made that 3.5-hour drive, arrived at her meeting. And basically, she was told to hang around, for a while by a staff member at the meeting. And about 7 hours passed before ICE agents arrived. And as you said, they put her into shackles at the waist, legs, and hands, and then into the back of a van with several other male detainees and moved her to Phelps County Jail in Rolla. And this was all basically, done without her being able to make a phone call. I think she told me that she finally got to make a phone call and to let her family know what had happened to her long after she was originally detained.
Mm-hmm. Now, Chad, you had an opportunity to talk with Carol's lawyer. Mm-hmm. What was his reaction, at the beginning of all of this? I mean, was he also shocked and surprised?
Yeah, he was very shocked. I spoke to him about his immediate feelings once it happened. And one of the things that he had talked about was that there was just, he was shocked because she's always been compliant. Like, she entered the country legally, and she had been doing check-ins on the regular, on an annual basis. So the idea that she would be, detained just really, really was something that he just couldn't expect.
Mm-hmm. And what is it that you learned, Chad, about Carol's coming to the U.S.? That is, why it is she fled Hong Kong to begin with?
Yeah, and I know, Kavahn, I know you spoke with her too and got some details on this too, but she arrived in 2004, and she arrived legally. And then pretty much she kind of overstayed her visit. And so she had applied for asylum as well. I know, Kavahn, you had talked to her about her relationship with her mother and, why she applied for asylum, trying to escape abuse and harm. And so about 3 times she had been denied the asylum request and such. And then she pretty much had a work visa, and she had been staying here since, and then applying or doing annual check-ins.
Mm-hmm. The government gave her a order of supervision, which allowed her to continue working in the United States, basically, and that is what she was going to renew. And she was used to that every 6 months to a year. And just to kind of go back, basically, Carol fled Hong Kong. She had told the courts that her mother was abusive, pretty seriously, and that she had sort of violent thoughts about her. And she fled. She worked up enough money working at a McDonald's in Hong Kong before she could come to America. And as Chad said, she did overstay her visa. Said that accepted that when the government came to say like, hey, we know you're here legally, and started working through the process with them. And that's where she kind of finds herself today, still working through the process, but with a order of supervision that allowed her to be in the country.
Mm-hmm. And one thing to clarify, Carol's work authorization was set to expire in January of 2026.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. So what is it that brought her up as early as April? I mean, is this just the timeline of when things need to be renewed?
That's actually somewhat unclear. When she got the invitation, or more of a, hey, you need to come to St. Louis to talk to us. It was unclear to her, and she actually asked Raymond Belorci, her lawyer, about why she needed to come, and they both were sort of in the dark about why that might be. But they said, follow the process. Do what you need to do, show up, and unfortunately that's when, ICE detained her. So she was trying to stay within the legal confines, and just this is what happened when she showed up to that meeting.
Mm-hmm. Now, as I understand, the two of you worked on this story together last week, but Carol was detained in late April. How is it that this story came to light for you?
Yeah, we have been, keeping an eye out for stories about immigration, especially in the new Trump era, and how that's affecting people. And we had done a story about a month ago-ish about Brian Garzon, who took his life in Phelps County Jail, and we were just keeping an eye out. And I saw a story from a small newspaper down in Dunklin County that kind of talked about Carol's situation. It was behind a paywall, but kind of got gleaned at it. Started making phone calls, and eventually, one source led to another, and we kind of found this situation, this very complex situation that Carol Mayorga was in, that could lead to her, being deported to Hong Kong. So it was just kind of an idea. There's a lot of these stories going on. So, it's just about finding one that was, this obviously in Kennett, this is a big deal for them.
Yeah. And do you have any sense, either of you, whether Carol or her lawyer had any expectation that this could happen?
Well, speaking at least from the lawyer's point of view, while it was very shocking that it happened to Carol because, like he said, she's been compliant and she's been following the rules, he has stated that he's been seeing more and more of these types of cases over the past couple months. Mm-hmm. So even though this situation shocked him, I think now him and other immigration lawyers are starting to see people who may have been here legally for years, but still or entered legally are still getting, deported or detained.
Yeah. Now, Kavahn, you mentioned the response in Kennett, and last Tuesday, you were able to talk with a number of people who came through John's Waffle and Pancake House, which is where Carol was working. But there was something really special going on there. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so her work, her boss, Donna Ramadani, who I got to speak with, basically opened up the Waffle House on a Tuesday when they're typically closed, and basically said, I will cover all of the cost of employees, everything that we sell, and every donation that comes in will go towards Carol's children, which she has 3. And her any sort of legal fees that she has, and I showed up at 6 a.m. at that it's a small parking lot, but it was packed from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. They had to lock the doors at the end, and these are people who are regulars that wanted to come and support Carol, people who I think, as we'll discuss, have views that sort of support deportation of immigrants without legal status. But it was a huge showing. This has become a movement in Kennett to bring Carol home, and it really showed at that diner. It was it was hard for me to move around as I was interviewing people. It was that packed, and people waited hours to sit down at a table to try to help Carol out.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we'll actually hear one of the people who spoke with you, Kavahn, at John's Waffle and Pancake House last Tuesday. We'll continue this conversation about a Missouri woman being detained for possible deportation to Hong Kong and the efforts that are being made by her rural Kennett community to try to bring her back home. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Let's return to our conversation about the story of Carol Mayorga, a nearly 2-decade resident of Kennett, Missouri, a town in the state's Bootheel area that's about a 3.5-hour drive south of St. Louis. In late April, Mayorga went to what she thought would be a routine check-in with immigration officials to renew her federal employment authorization. She was instead detained, shackled, and moved to a number of rural Missouri jails. Mayorga is now being held at the Greene County Jail in Springfield and faces deportation to Hong Kong. Her chief concern now is what will happen with her children, ages 14, 12, and 7, if she is deported.
I don't know what is it good. I don't want they live in the street with me, because if I'm by myself, I live in the street. I think I can handle it by myself, but with my children, no.
And that was Carol Mayorga speaking from the Greene County Jail in Springfield, Missouri last week with Midwest Newsroom investigative reporter Kavahn Mansouri. And we're talking with Kavahn and STLPR's Chad Davis. They're the co-writers of a Midwest Newsroom and St. Louis Public Radio feature about Mayorga's situation and her community's response. That piece is titled Bring Carol Home, ICE Snatches Rural Missouri Mom at Immigration Check-In. Now, before the break, Kavahn, you were talking about the people who had gathered last Tuesday in order to show their support for Carol and to try to bring her back home to Kennett. And one of those people was Judy Casey. And here's what she had to say about why she was there.
I think it's the sorriest thing I've ever seen. Don't get me started. It's very unfair. And I know there's lots of other people that have had the same opportunity, or not opportunity, but same thing happened to them. But she has been here for 20 years, I believe, 23 years. And the way I understand it, she still has a visa until August.
And that was Judy Casey. She was one of the regulars at John's Waffle and Pancake House in Kennett, showing her support for Carol Mayorga. Now, a major part of the story that you, Kavahn and Chad, that you've written, it focuses on how people in the Kennett community are trying to bring Carol back home and what it reveals about people's understanding of and their attitudes toward the Trump administration when it comes to immigrants. And another person you spoke with is Mark Bryant. He was also there on Tuesday. And here's what he said to you, Kavahn, about his position on removal of immigrants and his perspective on how the Trump administration is actually doing so.
I don't think some things are going the way they should. I think I agree with some things that are going on, but I just don't think they're doing it the right, taking the right process of saying, hey, you know, you've been here for so long, you've worked, you've showed your support for your communities and your family. I don't think anybody should be removed from that. I do believe that that criminals should be removed. I believe that. If you're a criminal and you came over here with nothing, then you need to be removed.
So you support, you're a supporter of President Trump and his policies on immigration?
But I do support his policies, but what I don't support is the way they're going about it. I think they're doing it, they're moving too quickly in removing people that shouldn't be removed.
Kavahn, to what extent did what Mark Bryant said to you then, how much do they reflect what you heard from others at John's Waffle and Pancake House?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably interviewed around like 20 people at John's. And I made sure to, after talking about Carol, ask them about their feelings about these policies, about President Trump. And I'd say, to put it into one gentleman who I didn't catch on tape, but was talking to me as I was taking photos. He said 95% of the people in this room support Trump. I do too, is I believe what he said. But he said this is wrong, and that's basically what people were saying. They support the removal of immigrants without legal status. They like that idea. But I think for a lot of them, what I got is they didn't expect that it to affect someone like Carol, someone in their community who pays taxes, who works every day. For some of them, is their part of their every morning. That is part of their routine. Routine is going to John's, reading the newspaper, talking with their server, Carol, and I just don't think that I think for a lot of them it was sort of the first sort of like, oh, this is these people too, not just people who lack legal, official legal status. The Caseys, when I talked to them, the people who sat at the table with them called Carol an easy target. And that when they voted for President Trump, they expected ICE to go after, criminals, people who are doing like serious illegal activities. And I guess, that was basically what I got from most people I talked to. They just didn't expect that someone like Carol could be, put into the back of a van and moved across the state and possibly to Mark Bryant, his kids play baseball with Carol's kids. Mm-hmm. And now, those games, he'll look across and, this mom that, was at sporting events in Saga, she's gone. And,
right.
And from their perspective, she didn't do anything wrong.
Mm-hmm. And if looking at the Facebook page for John's Waffle and Pancake House, you look through the photos in their gallery, and Carol is in so many of those pictures. What else did you hear from members of the community? You spoke with a pastor or a reverend in particular, right? What did she share with you?
Yeah, Kirsten King is the Presbyterian pastor in Kennett. They call her Pastor KK. She's been kind of a nexus of information for a lot of people, and because it's very hard to follow a ICE detainee. They're moved around a lot. It's hard to get in contact with them once they're inside. And honestly, to be frank, the ICE detainee locator does not tell you a lot. If you look up Carol under her legal name, Ming Li Hui, it just says contact the field office. But basically, she's become sort of a nexus of information. And, she talked a lot about how the town is struggling with this sort of dichotomy of they support President Trump, but they're really struggling with the fact that they're supporting his policies has led to them leaving, and she herself, thought a lot about Carol's kids. There's a piece of a quote that we couldn't quite fit in the article. It's getting quite long, and where she sort of thinks like, what is the path back for someone like Carol if she's deported?
Right.
When does she see her kids next? How do you explain it to those kids who are young?
Mm-hmm. Chad, did you have any opportunity to talk with Ray Berlucci, Carol's lawyer, about what might happen, with her kids, or maybe with other people who have faced similar situations where a parent could be deported and then they have children who are citizens of the U.S.? Yeah,
well, with the children, it's a little unknown. I mean, they are from the United States too, so there is, that level right there of protection. But when it comes to kind of, what happens next, maybe with her or so, it's they're hoping that the U.S. Board of Immigration Appeals will issue a stay, which would pretty much tell the Department of Homeland Security, we will not deport her. Mm-hmm. However, that gets a little complicated too, because let's say that does not happen, and let's say they take her to Louisiana or so. There's a big fear at that point they don't know what would happen. It's kind of like a little bit of a black box or so. You don't really, there's very little contact and such. And then from there, she could, be deported to Hong Kong or back to Hong Kong. So those are kind of the next steps, at least when it comes to her, what could happen if she does not issue that stay.
Right. And going back to the reason she fled Hong Kong, it has to do with the threat of physical harm and harm to her life potentially from her mother. This really stuck out to me because, Carol came to the United States legally when she was 20 years old, so not a child. But was there, any sense by which, like, the cultural norms of how things go for families in Hong Kong, regardless of how old you are, that she's actually at much greater risk of being seriously harmed by her mother in Hong Kong than if, she were living here and we were dealing with a situation where, like, cultural norms are different?
Yeah, I don't know if, my conversations with Carol were short than 30 minutes is what you're allotted, and it's kind of hard to get a hold of people. But what I will say is that Carol is very fearful of returning, not only because there is the reality that her mother may still be out there looking for, but also that she has nothing there. So she's basically preparing for her life on the streets, possibly in Hong Kong. So I would say what I can say is that she's very fearful. One of the things she said to me that stuck out, it was during a very poignant conversation, was she says, I'm afraid. I'm scared.
Yeah. Chad, does Carol's lawyer know why she's being moved around from jail to jail? Is there more of that potentially to come?
Yeah, I think that's just kind of what's been happening as of late, not just with Carol, but with a lot of different detainees. There's not really they haven't been told, a specific reason. They also don't really know if she was deported, like even when that would happen. And the lawyer said that's really a lot of times because of security reasons and such, but there's very little.
And as we wrap here, I want to bring it back, Kavahn, to you and what has happened among the folks in Kennett. What's your sense of how much of, Kennett's response to Carol's situation? Does that reflect what's happening in other parts of the country?
I think I've read a lot of stories where people are having these same sort of realizations. I think Carol's kind of stands out because it's so rural. We're talking Bootheel, Missouri, and it's as I talked with these folks, it was very clear to me that this was a real shock to them, a real awakening of something that they really just could not expect. As I've seen other stories of things like this happening, but I think with Carol, it's the first time in such a rural area that this is popping up.
Kavahn Mansouri is investigative reporter with the Midwest Newsroom, and Chad Davis is a reporter here at St. Louis Public Radio. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
You can read Kavahn and Chad's story at our website. That's STLPR.org.
This episode was produced by Elaine Shaw.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see Time is of the essence.
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.